Hello, everyone, and welcome to Architalks with Prakhar. In this session, we are joined by a fellow student, Dia, a gamer and an architecture enthusiast. We are also joined by Dr. Surabhi Pancholi, who is a distinguished researcher in architecture, urban design, urban planning, and placemaking. So, the discussion today is immersion in video games or architecture in level design, which is basically the place that level designers create in the form of games and are accessed by millions of people every day. Welcome, Dr. Pancholi. And today we are discussing this topic because I did a research about architecture in level design that was about how video games use different principles of design and techniques that are used in games from level, basically the entire thing, and then lighting, camera perspectives, use of colors that we also use quite often in architecture. Like we see how we use different colors to evoke different emotions. Like we pick different color palettes for restaurants and different color palettes for homes. And after that, we did a survey of about 150 people and found out that video games definitely do evoke emotion. But the question today, I guess, is do they eventually become immersive enough for people to feel a sense of place? So you did your work on the augmented Geelong project where you guys created a 3D model of a space which is no longer here physically available to us, but students can access and study that in a 3D model format, like with AR, VR. And how was that experience? Let's just start there.
Thank you, Prakhar. I think that's a very interesting project that we are looking here. I guess in order to understand what you just said, what is very important for us is to understand two aspects. First of all, what is sense of place? So it has earlier people obviously used to connect it only with how physically the spaces are, okay, but then later on it was discovered from based on psychology. So when psychological experts came together with their design expert, it was being found that experience of sense of place or sense of place is not just about how physical or what is the aesthetics of that place. It is beyond that. It is about how this place is being experienced. It splits up into a framework which is like conceived, perceived, and lived space. So conceived is just about the design, but then how do people live it, which is the experience of it? How do they experience it? And then perception. That is where I think the key lies of all the discussion that we are going to do. It is not just the physical form, it is also the way people or the user perceives it. Now we come to the next part, which is obviously about what does that perception depend on.
So, while looking at different games, like I have played hundreds of games throughout my life. I've been a gamer since the beginning, and I've seen the evolution of these graphics. These days, things are coming more into the realm of reality than ever before, and I think it just goes on forward from here. And we have seen games in the likes of Assassin's Creed where they have tried to recreate historical places like augmented Geelong, as far as I understand it, is a recreation of a space that's no longer here so that it can be experienced by the community and they can feel a sense of place, a sense of belonging, and a sense of history. Like this used to be here, but it's still like accessible to them. So I looked at a lot of different examples. For example, on the screen, we've got the Assassin's Creed Unity that is set in the city of Paris and at the time of French Revolution. So what happens basically is that you get to see these different locations and then you get to see them in the game. And while you are going through this city inside the game, you would feel like you are somewhere known to you, but it's not the same because, as you can see, the people just completely disappeared, like the modernity is gone. And what they are showing you is a past that is bygone but is still a part of this fabric of architecture. Like they explored these location, and in some cases they have got places that are laid like brick to brick to the original thing, and they've got so many similarities. So I think one of the best part about Assassin's Creed games is that they go through different places, like as we can see here in Unity, and they recreate it so well that, and then they populate it with NPCs who have like their own storylines and their schedules. So when you are going through the game, you don't feel like you are an external person and have been put in the middle of nowhere. You feel like a part of that world because the NPCs around you, they will be doing their own things. Not like you are in an artificial world, but they will also be speaking the lingo of that time. They will be doing some things like this guy on this rooftop is observing with a telescope, which you wouldn't find today. It's like taking you back in time, but to a location that is well known to you. So I think that's something very similar in these games and the architectural projects that we recreate, the historical projects. And I've had the pleasure of talking with someone who has worked on reconstruction, like renovation projects of historical sites, and they told me about the importance of having good data sets and good data at the initial stage so that you have something to compare with while doing these projects, because sometimes these restorations can be done like very badly. Like they paint over original brick walls and then they later have to go in and chip all that out. So if I think people knew a little bit better about those times and how the architecture worked, which is pretty evident in these games, it would be something very interesting to see.
Yes. I think there are two parts that we just you just mentioned. If I split that up, first thing is the experience that goes beyond the physicality. So there are tangible aspect of it, and then there is that whole intangible aspect. And I think it is very similar to what you are doing here, where you see all these people, all these games, kind of creating those activities which were very much that socio-cultural context which you can exactly see into these games that takes you to that context. Even if you go to Paris now, obviously the context is totally different. It's a modern context and it would be very hard for a person. So the way we actually experience the space is not just the tangibility but that intangible, which is about the activities which are happening, and also the moods and the atmospheres which is being created. So that's why the some at some places it is dark, so a person is being taken to that different dimension of it while he's just playing the game. And that's the same thing that we do in the architectural project, that we not only, it is not just one part obviously is to identify the authenticity of the materials that were used, the authenticity of the scales, the type of whole thing when you reconstruct it, but another part is also with the help of the digital resurrection, which is obviously now becoming very common. What we are also able to do is to bring in these intangible experiences, so that cultural context. So a lot of the research that we did, especially if we talk about the augmented Geelong, it was about the Geelong at that point of time. So you would see that all the roads around this place, they were no more, they were actually bullock carts, so there were different modes of transportation, there were no cars. So you kind of create that whole thing. And then when you present that, it would be a totally different experience than just obviously being here at this point of time when it is impossible to even think about those wool sheds at that point of time, when it used to be the biggest wool market, one of the most thriving, wool markets of Australia in terms of the wool sheds. And then later on, it transformed into different space, which was more about cars and overall yes.
Yeah.
So basically that intangible aspect that we can capture using the digital tools or technologies is, I think, very important.
I think what they try to do is basically trigger memory, and they use familiar architecture styles or development styles that we see around us. So, in case of Unity, you see a lot of those buildings where we have got colonial architecture in there. And the
Yes.
best part about these games is that in Assassin's Creed series, you are actually climbing or scaling these buildings all the time. So, you are very much actively interacting with the
Yeah.
architecture, and you see it quite up close. So you know the difference when you're playing Unity or you're playing Origins, where they've got a recreation of entire Egypt on a smaller scale,
Yes.
or you're playing maybe Odyssey, where they've got a recreation of Greece and in the Peloponnesian War time.
Hmm.
So they've got these different things that are going on at the same time, and I think you just mentioned how we use those aspects of lighting, color, and everything in architecture. I think something very similar happens with the Resident Evil series,
Yeah.
where they use these dark corridors and different sources of light, like specific points of light, to create and evoke emotions of fear, and is something that I just got that reminder of how Libeskin has done with the Jewish Museum, and
Yes.
how it actively uses very similar concepts on that scale. So I think triggering memory is very much part of this entire experience.
Yes, I think we can also look at the very base of it. So, what triggers memory? Now, when our memory is being created or triggered by the objects which where we feel very intensely, so wherever our emotions go very deep, that will be when a memory is created.
Okay.
So that I think is where that psychological aspect of it is very important to understand, and that's why these ones they create memories based on that emotional, depth or the emotional dip that you give or the highs that you give to the people. So you basically, what we are trying to do, the user is being taken to that fear, or let's say the exhilaration, the joy, the darkness, so that even in life the way we are trying with the memories are getting imprinted into our minds is through that pauses that happen. Okay.
Mhm.
So what is happening is like you are generally going with your routine, and not a lot of things actually get registered in your mind.
Okay.
But the moment there is a pause, there is a reflection, either by a height of, by joy or by fear or by anxiety or by something else, which actually cause a pause there. Okay. That is where a memory is imprinted. And I think that's what we are trying to, in terms of the architecture, what we are using that for is the uniqueness that we are trying to create. So what happens is that most of the times currently the people are not remembering the places that much, the current settings or the context, because most of the things look very similar. So it is not kind of asking them to stop and look at it, and or because everything is mass produced, there are developers, builders, there are different other aspects because of which there is that uniqueness about the places is being lost, which we used to have in Paris, which we used to have in the olden cities, the historical cities that we, yeah, still that is imprinted in our mind because that experience is different. Now what happens here is that by bringing in these digital technologies, and that is why I think that's also an acknowledgement of why do we try to actually recreate the past. If we already are here, because that was what has given us that memories or that attachment, which is very much needed obviously for creating sense of place or for the place making or developing a sense of belonging to that place.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very important part. Like you mentioned last time in our discussion, it's the uniqueness of a place that also helps. But I think with these games, they've got a storyline that's also going along
Yes.
with your experience of this architecture. So it all comes together as like one narrative, and humans are better evolved to register those narratives in their minds. So Hitman is known quite well to use its architecture or like the level design. That's the architecture around it or different small things in it to be a core part of the game mechanics. So you are basically using everything around you from, let's say, a ceiling fan, and this is an assassination game. So
Okay.
you're basically finding different ways to get rid of someone.
Okay.
So he's actively using level design, and I think that also gives it an immersive feel, because when you're going through this level, you've got this target to achieve, and you have got to use your surroundings to achieve that target. So the question is, it definitely does have a storyline and does involve emotion, but is it capable enough to create immersion, like a place of belonging?
I would say, see, these are very different concepts. Sense of belonging is a very different concept. Triggering memories and emotional responses is a different thing. Okay, sense of belonging is dependent on one's own identity. Like if I belong to a culture, and then I am playing a game which actually takes me back to that. Somehow there is a sense of some relationship which I have got with that, then only there will be a sense of belonging with that one. So because it's a very individualistic aspect, but in terms of the emotional responses, obviously this is very capable of doing it. So and because it also depends on the user group. So if you think that the user group comes from today's generation, let's say very strong kind of cultural context to where they, because there's a very globalized world in which today's kids are getting birth and they're growing up.
Yeah.
And so I think it is very different to the other user group. If for example, if you take someone who has a very strong cultural context, even if you they feel it, it may be just translated for the emotional responses, or maybe some sort of memories that they create, but to push it to the sense of belonging, that is another thing. And so I would say that it will totally depend on the user group that is getting involved with that. And this is very important in architecture, because when we think of digital resurrection, we cannot just cater to one group, which is very different to games, where obviously there is a one age group which is going to come and play with it. So maybe they may have some sort of sense of belonging just because of the social cultural context that they are coming from, but when you go to the other group, it would be different.
Okay.
And one more thing that I think I should add to this discussion is that we need to understand that obviously we talked of the weakness of it, but we also need to acknowledge the strength of it. So how we experience a space is in terms of the senses. So just by physical resurrection of a place, you are just providing a visual kind of experience. But what digitally, because it is about the smell of it, the experience of it, these emotional responses that we are talking about, they become a very important part of creating some sort of memory or some sort of sense of place with that one, some sort of connection with that one. So overall, I guess it is about bringing a combination of both of these things together. So currently, because it is just a screen, if we can extend
Yeah.
it to an experience, and that's what we are trying to explore further, that if you extend that emotional response by the experience, so you know how it is for the theaters, which will actually shower water over
4D
yourself and you're
movies.
actually 4D movies. So I guess it is more about the more senses you connect, more vivid will be the memory of that place. So I am just talking of the memory here,
Yeah.
but because a sense of belonging is very user group specific and
Okay.
very individual specific.
Okay. So immersion will improve as we go down the sensory lane and
Sensory level, yes.
create more places of human senses and how they are involved, because I think with the games, like how we do in architecture, we create these 3D models and we write about them.
Yeah.
We give little experts about them, and people read that, people see that. That's like recreating history on one level,
Yeah.
where they are involving their eyesight, the vision,
Yeah.
and their brain power. And then I think games take it to the second level with the addition of these storylines and
Storylines,
these
context, and getting people engaged into that. So I think
Yeah.
interaction is very important, because what happens is when they are allowing you to you become that person.
person.
Okay, so you are basically, the moment that water comes, you are basically thinking about, oh my god, I need to now cross the river. Okay, so your brain is now solving the problems that guy is actually having. Okay,
Okay.
so the moment you are into somebody else's shoes, you are already experiencing it. It is creating memory. All of that is happening. just because of that interaction that we are. And the more we push that interaction, to other senses, it will be more vivid. But it definitely does that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what they use to create games that are not just based on reality. Like, let's say for Assassin's Creed series, that is taking up places that actually used to be there on this planet. So they
Yes.
have got some tangible examples, some artifacts, something to pick from
Pick.
and design it from.
Yeah.
And then they've also got the knowledge of their writings, their language, so they can populate these worlds with their dialects of that time.
Yeah.
And people around you are saying, like saying all that, but then sometimes games take that creative, freedom to a next level to create worlds that are inspired from these things.
Yeah.
And I think building on that, they are able to create somewhat immersive spaces even outside reality. And I think with VR, we are also VR and AR, we are
Yeah.
also bringing this together to involve like more senses, like that gyro thing on your face, and you
Mhm.
are transported into that world. That is kind of the next evolution. But
Nice.
as you mentioned, we should like as we go further, maybe we evoke some sense of smell.
Sense of exactly,
Yeah,
yeah. Touch, the tactility of it, the
yeah,
touch and the auditory, the smell and the taste, if we can, somehow that kind of food or everything. So I guess that would be pushing it to the next level. But yeah, it is about, I think at the end of it, the best thing would, at some point, it would be the combination of physical and digital both together.
hmm,
And if we can
okay,
somehow create that environment where we can experience it as well.
okay,
So, and then so that combination would be the best one, rather than saying this is better or that is better. I
okay,
guess it is more about, like always, it's more about bringing those two together. It has its own advantages, and digital obviously is bringing so many of its advantages by adding on to that intangible layer, which physical can never be. Just by sticking to the physical aspect, we will not be able to do that. I think that keeping that sense of place, which we are kind of losing into the whole wave of globalization, by
hmm,
everything. And if you see that most of the times the themes they will choose will be from places which are very well known.
yeah,
So because you've already seen them in movies somewhere, so they are already
okay,
imprinted in your memories. These are the places which are popular, Paris and this, because they are already in, they are global places, they are
yeah,
into the memories. So that's why they are trying to obviously bring those
mm,
for your context, so that you can easily connect to it
okay,
as a generation. So similarly, I guess that a thing is required for most of the places which are losing that sense of place, because every place has some sort of uniqueness. There is
yes,
no place, but because of this whole wave of globalization, the competitiveness, the economy, the way it is, kind of, it needs things to be speedy, fast, and we are kind of losing it. It's very much required, and I think digital would be the way to go, because
hmm,
it is a speedy, it is fast, and it is somehow accessible to the next generation.
yeah,
We are
yes.
still into a bit of challenge for some age groups, but yeah, overall, I guess that's the solution. Yeah.
So that was a very nice discussion, long discussion about game design and how they use different
Yes.
aspects of architecture to storytelling
Yeah.
and the world around them. So, Dee, how did you feel about that? Do you have any questions for us?
It was a very immersive.
Yes.
There's so many things that's going on, and it's actually interesting how technology has come this far. And as a child,
Yeah.
I mean, I never thought really that
Yes.
this day would come.
Yeah, I think like the last point you mentioned, that's the basic of haptic architecture as well, and how we are trying to evolve those individual little tiny spaces with the feel and touch of that space.
Yeah.
And if that comes together with these environments, that would be the day, I think, where it is much more immersive.
More
And
immersive. Yeah.
yeah, all right. So that was a good one. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Dr.
Prakhar.
Pancholi, for doing this.
Thank you.
And I hope to have many more conversations
Yes,
like
let's
this
keep
one.
doing it. Yeah, I really enjoyed the overall idea of bringing in the game aspects because I guess many of that age group can connect very well with this one, and it's interesting to see how much detailed they have actually put in so much efforts into bringing in all. So that was very interesting. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Leah, for today's session and your help with everything.
Thanks,
And we will
dear.
see you later, guys.
See ya.